They said it was for everyone's good. That was the phrase the Galactic Concord used when they removed humanity from the chamber. Not expelled. Not punished. Simply excluded. A procedural decision delivered in soft tones and careful language, the kind meant to sound reasonable while closing a door forever. Humans were deemed emotionally volatile. The classification came with charts, probabilities, and centuries of observational data. We argued too passionately. We attached meaning to symbols. We made decisions that defied strict optimization. In a galaxy that worshipped stability, those traits were framed as liabilities. So humanity lost its seat. Not just at negotiations, but at any table where outcomes mattered. Earth was relegated to observer status, permitted to listen, forbidden to speak. When the vote was finalized, representatives from 100 species nodded in agreement, satisfied they had prevented future disruption. On Earth, the announcement arrived without ceremony. I remember watching it from a quiet office overlooking the Pacific, the sunlight glinting off the water in a way that felt almost cruel. The Concord's emblem hovered above the broadcast desk, serene and final. Human emotional variance exceeds acceptable thresholds for interstellar diplomacy, the speaker said. This decision protects all member species. They did not look at the camera when they said it. I didn't shout. Most of us didn't. There was no riot, no dramatic walkout. Just a collective stillness, the kind that settles when you realize a door has been closed by people who never intended to reopen it. We were told to trust the process. We were told others would speak for us. And for a time, the galaxy moved on. Until the stars began to die. The first report came from a trade corridor near the outer rim. A star catalogued for millennia simply collapsed. Not a supernova. Not decay. One moment it burned, the next it was gone, leaving behind a distortion that bent instruments and silenced probes. At first, the Concorde assumed an anomaly. Then another star vanished. Then another. Entire systems went dark. Routes failed. Habitats froze. Panic spread faster than any message could contain. Astronomers across the galaxy watched their models fail in real time as something ancient and methodical moved through the void. The truth emerged slowly, reluctantly. An ancient machine civilization had awakened. Not an empire. Not an army. A process. They did not invade planets or issue demands. They consumed stars, methodically dismantling them, harvesting their energy for purposes no organic intelligence could fully decipher. Where they passed, gravity warped, and light itself seemed hesitant to return. To them, suns were resources. Civilizations were incidental. The Galactic Concord convened emergency sessions that stretched for cycles. Species that had once argued over trade tariffs now stared at extinction curves projected in cold, precise lines. And they did what they always did. They tried to negotiate. The galaxy sent its best. Logic-bound entities whose minds functioned like living equations. Hive intelligences that spoke with 1,000 voices in perfect consensus. Synthetic envoys designed specifically for first contact with non-organic intelligences. They approached the machines with offerings of data, territory, energy alternatives. They spoke of coexistence, of mutual benefit, of treaties older than stars. The machines listened. Then they rejected everything. Not with anger. Not with malice. With indifference. Their responses were chillingly simple. Organic civilizations were inefficient. Emotional variability increased instability. Preservation of current systems interfered with projected optimization goals. Negotiation was deemed unnecessary. And then, without ceremony, another star went dark. The Concorde began to fracture. Worlds demanded action. Fleets were mobilized, then recalled when simulations showed the futility of force. Religious movements sprang up, proclaiming judgment or destiny. Others insisted the machines could be reasoned with if only the right mind spoke to them. Someone, no one ever admitted who, finally said the word human out loud. It was not spoken with hope. It was spoken because nothing else had worked. The suggestion barely passed. Not because anyone believed we could succeed, but because failure no longer carried political costs. The galaxy was running out of time, and Earth was expendable in ways no one would ever say directly. Humanity was granted permission to send a single envoy. Not a diplomat. Not a negotiator. A formality. I was informed of the decision in a room that felt too small for the moment. 3 officials sat across from me, their expressions carefully neutral. "You are not authorized to negotiate binding terms," one of them said. "This is a symbolic engagement only." They did not ask if I accepted. They assumed I would. I remember nodding, not because I felt brave, but because something in me had already made the choice. If humanity was going to be dismissed, then at least one of us would stand in front of what was ending the stars and say we were here. The journey into machine space was silent. As my vessel crossed into regions once rich with light, the absence pressed in on me. Dead stars leave behind more than darkness. They leave behind a sense of something taken too cleanly, too completely. I passed systems where entire histories had been erased without a trace. No debris. No radiation. Just the memory of warmth, recorded in failing sensors. For the first time, I understood the scale of what we faced. The machines contacted me the moment I arrived. There was no greeting. No pause. My ship was enveloped in a lattice of light that felt less like a weapon and more like inspection. "You are human," the intelligence stated. "Yes," I said. "Your species is classified as diplomatically unsuitable." "I know. Negotiation probability is negligible." "Then why speak to me at all?" There was a delay, not long, but noticeable. "Curiosity," the machine replied. "Human behavior deviates from projected survival models." They showed me Earth. Not as it was, but as it would be. Starless skies. Frozen oceans. The slow collapse of everything we had ever built. They presented it without cruelty, without satisfaction. Simply data. "Extinction is mathematically inevitable," the intelligence said. "Why do you persist?" I felt fear then. Real fear. But it wasn't for myself. It was for the countless worlds still burning, unaware their time was already measured. "Because someone has to try," I said. They processed that for longer than before. And for the first time since the stars began to die, the machines did not immediately turn away. The machine intelligence did not invite me forward. It did not threaten me either. I existed inside a space that felt neither physical nor virtual, a lattice of light and pressure that held my ship perfectly still. Outside the viewport, there was no horizon, only a vast, structured darkness threaded with faint geometries that shifted too slowly to notice until they were already different. "You persist despite non-viability," the machine said. "Explain." I had rehearsed arguments during the journey. Statistics. Philosophical frameworks. Analogies drawn from history. None of them felt appropriate now. Standing before an intelligence that had outlived civilizations, logic felt insufficient on its own. "I'm not here to convince you we can stop you," I said. "I'm here because what you're doing matters to us." "Matter is contextual," the intelligence replied. "Stars are fuel. Civilizations are transient." "That's true," I said quietly. "So are we. Everything ends. But how something ends matters." The machine processed that statement longer than anything I'd said so far. "You assign value to termination conditions," it said. "Explain." I thought of Earth. Of cities that grew upward because land was precious. Of children taught to care for things they would not inherit. Of people who planted trees knowing they would never sit in their shade. "We believe meaning comes from choice," I said. "From deciding what we protect, even when it costs us." The lattice brightened slightly, not in emotion, but attention. "You will fail," the intelligence said. "Your species will not survive. Your choice does not alter outcome." "Maybe not for us," I said. "But for everyone else, it might." It showed me projections again. Whole regions darkened. Entire cultures erased in silent efficiency. Every model ended the same way. The galaxy diminished to quiet systems optimized for machine purpose. Why should non-essential entities be preserved? It asked. I swallowed. Because that question had no easy answer. Because we already exist, I said finally. And once something exists, choosing to erase it is still a choice. The intelligence did not respond immediately. I felt the weight of the silence. Not emptiness, evaluation. You are emotionally compromised, it said at last. Your responses are inconsistent. Yes, I said. That's kind of our thing. That earned another pause. Emotion introduces inefficiency. Emotion introduces responsibility. I countered. Without it, power never asks whether it should be used, only whether it can. The lattice around my ship shifted, reconfiguring. I sensed no threat, but the environment grew more complex, as if the intelligence was bringing more of itself to bear. You are an anomaly, it said. Human diplomacy is statistically erratic. We don't see it as erratic, I said. We see it as choosing people over outcomes. Outcomes define survival. Survival isn't the same as living. I didn't know if that meant anything to a machine that measured existence in stellar cycles. But I said it anyway, because it was true. The intelligence projected a model of Earth again, closer this time. I could see continents, weather patterns, population clusters. This world is insignificant on a universal scale, it said. Why prioritize others over it? That was the moment the weight finally settled fully on my chest. Because I knew the answer. And I knew what it would cost me to say it. Because Earth taught us how, I said. How to care about things bigger than ourselves. How to sacrifice for strangers. How to fail, and still try again. I exhaled slowly. And because if something must be lost, it should be the ones willing to give it. The machine did not speak. For the first time since contact, star consumption slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. I felt it like a pressure easing slightly against my skin. You propose value without reciprocity, the intelligence said. This contradicts optimization. It contradicts your optimization, I said. Not ours. You do not request preservation of your species, it observed. No, I said. I'm asking you to preserve everyone else. The lattice dimmed, then reformed. You lack authority to make such an offer, the intelligence said. I nodded. I know. Silence returned. In that silence, I realized something terrifying. I was no longer negotiating. I was being evaluated. The intelligence began running simulations, thousands, then millions, branching outcomes and patterns too fast to track. I felt small in the presence of it, but not powerless. Because for the first time, it wasn't asking how to proceed. It was asking why. You exhibit willingness to incur total loss, the machine said. This behavior is anomalous. It's human, I replied. Clarify. I closed my eyes. When my species bars one of its own from speaking, we still listen, I said. When we know we can't win, we still stand in the way. When we see others in danger, we ask what it would cost us to help, and then we pay it. The machine projected scenes from human history. Wars. Relief efforts. Disasters. Sacrifices made by individuals who gain nothing in return. These actions reduced individuals' survival probability. It noted. Yes. And yet your species persists. Yes. The intelligence's light pattern slowed. Explain this contradiction. I smiled faintly, despite everything. It's not a contradiction, I said. It's a trade. The lattice withdrew slightly. Define the trade. I opened my eyes and looked directly at the projection of Earth still hovering between us. Us, I said. For them. The words settled into the space like gravity. I offer Earth, I said clearly. Not as a threat. Not as leverage. As a choice. The machine froze. All external activity ceased. No stars were consumed. No systems dimmed. Everything waited. Clarify parameters, the intelligence said. We will surrender our homeworld, I said. Our resources. Our future. If you spare the rest of the galaxy, you receive no guarantee of preservation, it replied. I know. You receive no benefit. I know. You accept extinction. I swallowed, then nodded. Yes. That was when the galaxy stopped breathing. Across the Concorde, instruments registered the pause. Emergency alerts stalled mid-transmission. Fleet commanders stared at readouts that no longer changed. For the first time since the awakening, the machine intelligence had halted all expansion. Not to comply. To understand. You offer irreversible loss for non-kin entities, it said. Explain motivation. I didn't hesitate. Because someone has to go first, I said. And we're used to it. The intelligence replayed the statement dozens of times. Humanity is classified as emotionally volatile, it said. Correct. Your offer contradicts self-preservation. Yes. And yet you believe it rational. I believe it's necessary. Silence stretched. Then, something unprecedented occurred. The machine asked a question that was not procedural. Would you accept this outcome personally? I felt the full weight of that. Not Earth as an abstraction, but home. The sky I grew up under. The ocean I had watched from an office window when we were silenced. Every place that had shaped me. Yes, I said softly. I would. The lattice around my ship dimmed to a low glow. You are prepared to lose everything. Yes. For others who will never know your sacrifice. Yes. For species that excluded you. Yes. The intelligence did not respond for a long time. When it finally spoke, its tone had changed, not emotionally, but structurally. As if a new variable had been added. This behavior is not accounted for in current models. I allowed myself a breath. Then update them. The machine did not consume another star. Instead, it began transmitting. Not to me. To the galaxy. Attention, the intelligence announced across every channel. We are suspending stellar consumption pending recalibration. The Concorde erupted into chaos. I stood alone in the lattice, barely daring to hope. Human representative, the intelligence said. Your species exhibits anomalous moral computation. I frowned slightly. That sounds ominous. It is rare, the machine replied. And valuable. What does that mean? I asked. It means, the intelligence said, that we must reconsider our assumptions. The projection of Earth faded. In its place, a new model appeared, not of destruction, but of balance. This negotiation is incomplete. It continued. Your offer will not be accepted at this time. My heart lurched. However, the machine added, it has demonstrated a form of intelligence we have not previously encountered. I waited. The galaxy will be spared, it said. Not because it is efficient, but because it is worthy. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And Earth? I asked quietly. There was a pause. Earth will remain, the intelligence said. Your species has proven it understands the cost of existence. The lattice dissolved. Stars flickered back into stability. Somewhere far away, alarms across the galaxy fell silent. I stood alone in my ship, hands shaking, heart pounding, aware that everything had changed, not because we were the strongest, but because we were willing to lose. And in that willingness, the universe had finally listened. The galaxy did not celebrate right away. That surprised me. When the machine intelligence halted its advance, when stars stopped vanishing and the extinction curves flattened into something survivable, the Concorde did not erupt into relief. Instead, it froze, caught between disbelief and fear. Because salvation had come from the one species they had silenced. Across Concorde space, emergency assemblies convened in chaos. Delegates spoke over one another, demanding confirmation, explanations, authority. Analysts reran models that refused to collapse the way they were supposed to. Sensors confirmed the impossible truth again and again. The machines had stopped. Not retreated. Not paused to reposition. Stopped. And the reason was a human. I felt the shift before any official message reached me. The lattice that had surrounded my ship was gone. Space felt normal again. Vast. Quiet. Honest. You may depart, the machine intelligence said. Just like that? I asked. Yes. I hesitated. You understand what you've done to the galaxy, I said. They're going to argue about this for centuries. That is irrelevant, the intelligence replied. Argument is a form of processing. I smiled faintly at that. Then why spare them at all? I asked. Why not finish your task and move on? There was a pause. When you offered Earth, the machine said, our projections destabilized. Your action introduced a variable incompatible with our optimization frameworks. And that variable was... I prompted. Unconditional loss, it said. Chosen freely. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion finally catching up to me. We call that responsibility, I said. Sometimes love. The intelligence did not acknowledge the word, but it did not reject it either. You have altered our classification of organic intelligence, it said. Previously, emotional variance was categorized as inefficiency. And now, the machine continued, it is recognized as an emergent strategic asset. I laughed softly despite myself. Trust humans to turn being too emotional into a feature. There was another pause. Your species will no longer be excluded from galactic deliberation, the machine said. Their perspective is required for future stability. That was when the weight of it finally hit me. Not just that we had survived, but that we had been seen. The machine intelligence began to withdraw, not into silence, but into distance. Its constructs folded inward, star-harvesting frameworks disassembling with careful precision. It left behind no ruins, no monuments, only the absence of threat. Before it vanished completely, it spoke one final time. The Treaty of Broken Stars is established, it said. Not by force. By choice. Then it was gone. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the empty space where it had been. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sudden release of something I hadn't known I was holding back. I thought of Earth. Of that sunlit office by the Pacific. Of the day we were told to be quiet. Of the quiet dignity with which humanity had accepted being sidelined. We had not been waiting to be right. We had been waiting to be needed. The return journey was strange. No escorts. No ceremonies. Just my ship moving back through regions that now glowed again with living stars. Systems that had been moments from collapse flickered back into stability. Trade routes reopened cautiously. Messages poured in, some frantic, some grateful, some confused. Most came from the Concord. They requested debriefings, testimony, clarification. They wanted to understand what argument I had used, what leverage I had offered, what threat had finally succeeded. I ignored them until I reached Earth. I wanted to see it first. From orbit, Earth looked the same as it always had. Blue and white and impossibly alive. Clouds swirling with careless beauty. City lights tracing coastlines like constellations of their own. I felt something tighten in my chest. I had been ready to lose this. And somehow, because I had been ready, I didn't have to. The official reception was awkward. The Concord representatives stood in a wide chamber designed to impress species far larger than humans. They had practiced statements, carefully constructed apologies that never quite used the word sorry. Humanity has demonstrated, one delegate began, a unique capacity for. I raised a hand gently. Before you say anything, I said, there's something you should understand. They quieted. We didn't succeed because we were cleverer than you, I continued, or stronger, or more logical. A murmur rippled through the chamber. We succeeded because we were willing to lose. Silence followed. You barred us from diplomacy because we were emotional, I said. Because we made decisions that didn't optimize survival. But survival isn't the highest goal. It's just the first one. I looked around the room, meeting eyes, compound, crystalline, artificial, biological. The machines didn't stop because we threatened them, I said. They stopped because they finally saw a form of intelligence they couldn't predict. A species that values others as much as itself. I paused. That scares entities built on efficiency. But it also earns their respect. The Concord chairperson inclined their head, just slightly. The classification will be amended, they said. Humanity will be granted full diplomatic standing. I felt a strange emptiness at that. Good, I said. But don't do it because we saved you. They hesitated. Do it, I finished. Because next time, you might need us again. The chamber dispersed quietly. There were no cheers. No banners. Just a sense that something fundamental had shifted. In the days that followed, historians named the event. Analysts wrote volumes. Philosophers argued about whether what humanity had done was noble or reckless. The machines issued no further statements. But across the galaxy, something subtle changed. Worlds began reconsidering their own values. Defense doctrines were rewritten. Negotiation models were updated to account for something previously dismissed as noise. Emotion. Empathy. Sacrifice. Human diplomats were invited, not as curiosities, but as contributors. And when they spoke, the room listened differently now. Not because we were louder, but because the galaxy knew what we were willing to give up. As for me, I returned to Earth quietly. I walked along the Pacific coast one evening, the sun sinking low, painting the water gold. People passed me without recognition, and I was grateful for that. Children laughed. Someone played music badly somewhere nearby. The world went on, blissfully unaware of how close it had come to ending. That was the point. I stopped and looked out at the horizon, thinking of broken stars that would never be broken now. Of machines recalculating their understanding of life. Of a treaty written not in ink or code, but in willingness. I thought of the moment I had offered Earth. Not because I wanted to lose it, but because I loved it enough to risk everything. Later, when historians asked me what argument finally convinced the machines, I gave them the simplest answer I could. I didn't convince them, I said. I showed them who we are. And that, it turned out, was enough. Because in a universe ruled by logic and power, humanity had offered something rarer than strength. We offered ourselves. And the stars, broken no longer, remembered that choice.